Righto, we do have news that Tyler Bindon will soon be joining Chris Wood at Nottingham Forest. Not quite right now, but I can feel your energy. I can feel the mana waves just pouring out of you towards Nottingham and Nottingham Forest, the Wood in Nottingham. Empty the tank. Just give me all you got about Tyler Bindon joining the Nottingham Forest, but I also know you're locked and loaded with Chris Wood stats because he scored a hat-trick and a big win for Nottingham Forest, I think, over Brighton Hove Albion. And I will say, I will add my 2 cents, my couple of five
Please.
whacks. Two of Chris Wood's goals, I think one was a header, one was a bit of a foot action. The third was a penalty. But the two goals that came in from crosses came exactly how I have noted with Chris Wood. Because I think it's the dude beside him there, is that Ulanga?
Anthony Elanga, yeah, set up both the goals you're talking about.
Exactly. And where did his crosses go?
One was chipped to the back post and one was laid through sort of 6-yard box, more or less in the middle, I think he was.
Both of them went between the defensive line and the goal. And
There
that
you
is
go.
exactly what Chris Wood told me when he was doing his masterclass. He said, I've got the connection with my teammates that if I'm just hanging on the defensive line, you just put that ball between the defense and the goal, and I will always get there. That is the connection that Chris Wood shares with his comrades at Nottingham Forest. And I was watching those goals and I was like, well, both of those crosses, like Chris Wood isn't bursting into that space. He's just hanging on the defensive line, and those crosses come exactly where those crosses are put exactly where Ulanga and any of his teammates know that Chris Wood's going to get there first, and those crosses are put into spaces where Chris Wood knows that's where the cross is going. So it's a key detail for me when I'm watching Chris Wood, and I hope to see this expand out to the All Whites where people just know, put the ball between the defense and the goal, and Chris Wood would always get there, no matter how he is positioned before the cross comes in. Because he can predict, he knows where the cross is coming, so he's always going to get there. But it's like he always starts just on the shoulder of the defender. He doesn't. It doesn't look like he's going to burst forward into the space. He's always just lingering, but he knows exactly where the cross is going to come. Two of those goals came from those crosses, and that is my expertise on Chris Wood and Nottingham Forest. Your turn.
Well, that point there is, I think, the biggest thing in favor of Francis de Vries getting a lot more always opportunity, not necessarily as a starter, but also possibly as a starter. Because, like, head to head, there's just no way you would pick him ahead of Liberato Cacace. He was just a much better player. I don't really care how well you play in the A-League. If there's a guy playing regular Serie A minutes, that's better. But Cacace is increasingly quite a versatile player, and he can, I have no doubt if he can play as a left winger in Serie A, he can play as a left winger for the All Whites, particularly at a time when, the next window it's touch and go whether Ben Old will be fit in time for that one. And there is a possibility there, and then maybe you get Francis de Vries in there as the left back and as a set piece taker, specifically because his crossing is so good. Like, the stuff he's doing for Auckland FC now, it's such a weird one because I watched him a lot when he was playing for Eastern Suburbs, and it felt like he was always capable of hitting that one perfect cross, but it would be like one was amazing and three were terrible. And admittedly, he was coming back from an ACL injury at that point. Like, his fitness wasn't where it wanted to be, and he was probably at a bit of a crossroads in his career as well, which would have affected him maybe mentally too, having lost out on his gig in Sweden and having to rebuild his career back in semi-pro / amateur stuff in New Zealand. So admittedly, we're never going to get the best of him at that level, but the consistency that he's showing now is incredible for Auckland, just specifically with those crosses, how every cross looks like it's going into a dangerous area that challenges the defenders, challenges the goalkeeper, and is in a spot where the attackers want it to be. Well, Chris Wood's going to feast upon that if you have, even if it's just like chuck on Franny de Vries for 15 minutes at the end of a game when you're chasing a goal and you have him taking the corners and you have him whipping in deep crosses. Like Chris Wood's going to love that too. Like just to have that as an option, I think is the biggest thing in his favor for getting more opportunities. Because even then, like I said, Kakache is a better player, but I think Dalton Wilkins is probably a better player as well. We just haven't seen a lot of him yet for the All Whites, and you've also got guys like James McGarry and Sam Sutton hanging around. Like there's good left backs there in competition, but De Vries has at least that one special thing that might line up very well with the team's best player. And yeah, Chris Wood's got a combination with Anthony Elanga that's kind of crazy because that's the fourth goal he set up for Wood this year, and he did 6 of them last year. So since the start of last season, no combination of assist to goal scorer has had more goals than the 10 that those two have combined for, which is pretty incredible. And that's perfect Chris Wood stuff as well, because he always says every single interview they ask him about this stuff, and he's just like, yeah, well, I couldn't do it without the service I get from my teammates. They put it on a plate, and it's just my job to go and gobble up that meal that they serve to me. And every time he scores goals, it's the same. Like they've just got I'd say telepathic, but it's not that. It's just that they've played it together enough now. He's as embedded with these players that it doesn't have to be telepathic. They just know. Like it's not trying to figure anything out. They just know the answer to these things. This is where Chris Wood likes to be. This is where I'm going to put the ball, and he's going to do the rest.
Yeah, it can't be telepathic if they probably just said it to each other.
Yeah,
like Chris Wood just.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be telepathic.
Chris Wood said, "You put the ball between the defense and the goal. Yeah. I'll get it." And so, yeah, it's just communication. That's just talking. That's just friendship. That is chemistry with your teammates, not necessarily psychic powers.
No, it doesn't need psychic powers because it's actually a simple thing. It's one of those Conan Doyle ones, or it's an obvious thing that people maybe overlook. It's just like, well, what if you just keep crossing? What if you ask the striker where he wants the ball, practice it heaps in training and during games, and you keep putting the ball there, and he keeps getting there, and he keeps scoring goals? It's maybe not a coincidence, but yeah, that was his third Premier League hat-trick in his career, which makes him the 43rd player in history to have scored three separate Premier League hat-tricks. He got one for Burnley against Wolves, which is funny because the manager of that Wolves team was Nuno Espirito Santo, who's now his manager at Nottingham Forest. So he scored a hat-trick against the manager, who then got the best out of him a few years later when they combined. He also got one against Newcastle with Forest after leaving Newcastle. 6 months later, he scored a hat-trick on Boxing Day against Newcastle, against his old team. And then, of course, Brighton is one of his old teams as well. Not quite in the same way, because Brighton was sort of a team that he was at, I think, on loan earlier on in his career. He spent a little bit of time there, not a lot, and it was lower down in the league, so it's not really quite the revenge tour that it might have been for him, trying to show Newcastle United what they missed out on. But yeah, third Premier League hat-trick, and probably, I think, the perfect Chris Wood hat-trick as well, because one was a header, one was a tap-in, one was a penalty. Like the three things that he excels the most at. No player's scored more headers this season, by the way, than Chris Wood. He's got 6 headed goals this year. I think Haaland and Isak are on 4 each, so it's not even that close. He's got a spare. There's some daylight between him and second place. Just incredible stuff from Chris Wood, who continues to convert chances at just a really efficient rate. I think he's got, what is he up to now? 17 goals. So the most he scored in a Premier League season. His previous record was 14. He had tied that before this game. He did it also last season. He did it also with Burnley in 2019-20. He's now got 17 goals this season. He's third on the Golden Boot ranks. I think the postman must be here because the dog's gone nuts in the background. Either that or the dog just found out about the Tyler Bindon transfer. Because all the stuff with Chris Wood, I feel like I'm just updating the stats each time. Like, guess what? He's taken another penalty and he scored another penalty. He still hasn't missed a penalty in any form since April 2016. Like, we're nearing 9 years since he last missed a professional play. Like, that's the bulk of his peak of his career right there. And he's perfect from the spot. He's never missed a penalty. I think he's 8 out of 8 in the Premier League from the penalty spot. Just amazing stuff. He's never missed a penalty for the All Whites either. Just throw that one out there too. But I feel like I'm updating these stats each time. Like, he just keeps adding to them. It's not necessarily that he's doing new stuff, but I don't know. He signed a contract recently with Nottingham Forest, right? Signed a 2-year extension. They only wanted to give him a 1-year extension. They were doing this annoying thing where it's like, oh, well, he's in his 30s now. I don't know if he can sustain this. So I don't think it's necessarily about like, we don't want him on the books for 2 years. I think it was more like, if we give him a 1-year contract now when he's at his peak, we'll pay him for what he's doing this season. Like we got to pay him what he's worth, what the negotiating says. But he's probably not going to be this good next season. So if we sign the second year of that contract next season, we can probably negotiate him down in his salary a little bit. Rather than if we pay it now, we're paying him for 2 years based on his peak performances. I think that's more the thought process there. It's not that they didn't want him for 2 years. It's that they thought they could save some money if they split that contract in two. But he just kept scoring goals. So at some point, you just have to say, well, I guess we just have to give you what you want. And so they've given him what they want. And then suspiciously, 2 weeks later, one of his international teammates gets signed. And last year, they signed Marko Stamenic as well. I think there is some element of like, they're obviously, the Nottingham Forest scouts will be watching the All Whites games. They want to see what one of their key players is doing. They'll be watching all the international games that their players are involved in. And so you're going to see guys like Tyler Bindon and Marko Stamenic. You're going to notice that. I don't know if it's a bit of a romantic notion, but I also like to think that maybe Chris Wood is putting in a good word for some of his international buds as well, you know, and saying, like, this Tyler Bindon kid, I've trained with him a lot. Like I've gone head to head with him in all whites trainings, and he's the real deal. This Marko Stamenic lad, like he's the real deal. We know, like I can tell you guys, you could see how good he is in some of these games. I'm telling you, he's better than that in training. I like to think that Chris Wood is doing a little bit of that. I'm speculating here, but maybe he even put it in his contract and you give me a +1 for the contract. I want this Tyler. I'll sign the deal and make sure you bring in Tyler Bindon as well in January. I don't know, but it's a nice little conglomeration where this has happened. I will say also there's another element to this, which is that it's a fellow called Nelson Abbey who used to play. I think this is who it was. Used to play for Reading, who was a centre back guy that Bindon rotated with a little bit first half of last season. Abbey left not to Nottingham Forest but to Olympiacos in the transfer window around this time a year ago. So Olympiacos is owned. That's where Marko Stamenic is on loan. It's owned by the same guy who owns Nottingham Forest. So he didn't go to Nottingham Forest, but he did go within their sort of like club structure within the umbrella. And it was when Nelson Abbey left that Tyler Bindon then had to step up and be the full-time centre-back. It's like, you're starting every single game now. And it was at that point that he went to a new level and has been pretty amazing for them ever since, because of a move from one of their dudes leaving to go to Olympiacos. And so you know already that if that's happening, that they've probably got shared scouts between Forest and Olympiacos. You know they're already looking at Reading because they've signed a player from there before. And then you see the guy who steps up to replace the guy that you signed, who, by the way, hasn't really done anything. I don't think he's even at... I think they loaned him off to Swansea and he didn't do very well, so he got brought back to Olympiacos, and I think they're going to loan him out somewhere else, and maybe they already have. So we'll see what it turns out to be for Bindon, because obviously we want to see the Bindon Stamenic Wood spine in a Premier League game. That'd be incredible. Chris Wood's going to be there, but Marko Stamenic is out on loan playing off the bench as like the fourth choice midfielder at Olympiacos at the moment. So it's not necessarily a guarantee he goes from there straight back to Forest. There's things about fit and whatever where, and he'll get a preseason to nail things down. And he's still doing all right there in Olympiacos. He's not playing badly when he plays. He's just a little bit down the charts there. And Bindon's going to be loaned back to Reading for the rest of this season, and who knows where he will be next year, whether he hangs around the fringes of the Premier League squad, or if they want to send him on loan to a championship team, or maybe even Reading can manage, with Bindon sticking around, maybe they can manage to get promoted back to the championship themselves and he has another year at Reading. Who knows? Like, he's secured in the long term, but that doesn't necessarily mean he goes straight into the Nottingham Forest team or anything like that. We'll see what kind of plans they got for him, because we're seeing the same thing already with Alex Paulson as well, haven't we? Where, signed to a Premier League team, but then loaned out, and Stamenic signed to Forest, but then loaned out, albeit loaned out within that umbrella again. So don't know exactly how that's going to go, but there's a few different connections there with how that's gone down. And the one I like the most is the whether it's true or not, at least the image I have in my head of Chris Wood sitting at the bargaining table, negotiating his new contract and being like, I'll sign I'll sign on your terms. But you bring me in that Tyler Bindon as well. And you give Marko Stamenic a preseason next season, when we get back after he finishes his loan, we'll get this All Whites reunion going. I mean, Matt Garbutt's available. Maybe we'll get that one done before the deadline closes today as well. Put in a bid for Libby Kakachi while you're at it. Why not? Get them all together.
I don't think it happened at the bargaining table, but I can see how the connections were used. Like I think it's completely logical to suggest that, because obviously, like, the world of football is so big, and there's so many footballers that, yes, Tyler Bindon's a good young centre back, but there's good young centre backs around the whole world, right? You can get value from many different countries, but once you've got, then comes into the ownership group stuff. Like, obviously there's connections there, but there's also a trusted leader in your club. All he needs to do, like all Chris Wood needs to say is, hey, go have a look at Tyler Bindon. You've already scouted Reading, as you laid out with the other centre back,
and probably the All Whites too. So yeah,
exactly. So like you can say, put a spotlight on Tyler Bindon, because you're already watching the games, because you're already invested in scouting these games, and then you're getting into a better space where you're not just like, because obviously this doesn't happen, but it would be a bit weird to just sign players because Chris Wood said so, but it replaced Chris.
You say it doesn't happen, but like Bronny James is out there, so.
Yeah, but that's America. That's basketball.
That is America.
Football. I'm talking England Premier League football, and there is very few footballers in the Premier League who any club will say, yeah, we're going to sign this player because you said so. They might take on the advice, but they've all got the deepest scouting networks. They've all got the connections around the world. So, yeah, I think there's a little bump. There's a little Chris Wood bump. Like he is saying he is a trusted leader at Nottingham Forest, and if like Nottingham Forest have a need, they have a gap in their roster, they're going to test out those connections. But also, you got to pass the scouting test. And one, based on what we know about Marko Stamenic, based on what I think Marko Stamenic was probably before Chris Wood had a bit of mana built up with Nottingham Forest. But you still need to be good at football. You still need to be doing good stuff. And Marko Stamenic, Tyler Bindon, excellent footballers on the rise in two positions where you can see them adding value to Nottingham Forest. We've also got a Football Ferns squad.
We do.
So the Football Ferns squad, they are playing 2 games in Costa Rica. It's still a little bit goofy that Michael Main is the interim coach, even though we've got assistant coaches sorted. He's basically choosing the squad. So it seemed like it would be a little bit ridiculous if he's not going to be the full-time coach, given everything that's happened. So
my impressions as well, especially because the same thing happened in parallel with Darren Paisley. Like, he was sitting as assistants, he was picking squads, he had multiple tours to do things, and then they just ended up hiring him full-time. Feels like we're on exactly the same course with Michael Main.
And that feels a lot like the New Zealand cricket coaching positions and vacancies. If you promote from within, it's going to be a little bit cheaper. And of course, New Zealand cricket, New Zealand football, they don't have like money to blow on Jose Mourinho or even Brendan McCullum. Like, Brendan McCullum's making a lot more money coaching England than he would coaching New Zealand, let alone any Stephen Fleming, Daniel Vittori, who have jobs around the world as well. So there's a little bit of saving money, but also these dudes have intricate knowledge of the pathways. So Darren Paisley worked his way up through the New Zealand football pathway. Michael Main's worked up through the New Zealand football pathway. I think we're getting to that stage. Like, I believe the next Black Caps coach after Gary Stead will be promoted from within. I think that's the way New Zealand cricket's heading as well, where they promote players with intricate knowledge of a very strong pathway development system, just working their way to the top. So I think me and you, we are operating under the assumption that Michael Main will be the long-term, unless he sucks, Football Ferns coach. To me, that frames the squad he has selected for this little series. Because there are players who are missing. You've listed some notables as CJ Bock, Katie Bowen, and Rebecca Stott, all very highly respected Football Ferns, who probably already have a relationship with Michael Main. Michael Main probably already knows what they're up to around the world, knows their workloads, knows their status, knows what they're up to, knows what they can add to the Football Ferns. So maybe, okay, now's not the best time for you to come into a Football Ferns squad, but you got to fly across the whole, you've got to fly across the world just to play some football games. As well as we've got some younger players, again, who Michael Main has relationships with, to get them an opportunity. And you'll know better than me, but the current Football Ferns squad, and so not the current squad for this Costa Rica series, but the mixer, the Football Ferns mixer, this must be the deepest mixer we've had. This is an industrial mixer. This is not your kitchen mixer where you're licking the icing off the little fork thingies, brewing your cake. No, the Football Ferns mixer, similar with every other sport we talk about, this is an industrial baking mixer. It's big. And you've got players who have missed out on selection, but are probably in your top tier squad. You've got youngsters who are now getting an opportunity. You've got Maya Hahn coming back from the Germany mixer. Now she's back in the Aotearoa mixer. The Germany mixer is probably built better, given what we know about the Germans.
It's also more full, though.
It's also more full. It's more industrial, more efficient, yes, and more effective at baking good goods. Shout out to all the bakers. Getting baked. So this squad especially tells me, and you've been on this point, you've been like the number of players playing professionally around the world, getting good opportunities, playing for the Football Ferns, making their debuts, the turnover of Football Ferns players we've had over the last 3 to 4 years. I reckon we're approaching a pretty cool era for the Football Ferns where they have a lot of players in the mix. And to be honest, the football especially, the more players you can have with a little bit of international experience, who have been in the setup, who have been around the team, they know the culture of representing Aotearoa, specifically in football. I don't think we've had big footballing culture elements prior to the last 5 years. Like, it just seems like these teams get together, play some games, they might win a few games, and then somehow they get to a World Cup, and then they just, go their separate ways. Now it feels like there's a genuine Kiwi footballing culture that has been bolstered by the grassroots and going to the top tier. But the Football Ferns and the All Whites, but we're talking about the Football Ferns here, players are going to be injured playing club football. Players are going to be unavailable because their clubs won't let them play, because the travel restrictions, whatever it might be. Players are going to be out of form because they're not starting for their club teams. What's the squad total? How many players selected?
23.
23 selected in this Football Ferns squad. I'm talking about 30 players in the Black Caps, 35 players in the Black Caps wider squad. I'm talking about top 50 for the New Zealand Warriors, which means the Kiwis need to have 40 players. The Football Ferns, we got 23 players in this squad. The Football Ferns need to have 40 players competing for selection for the Football Ferns to get better, perform better, and win games of football around the world and in major tournaments. So I think we're just taking a step towards that level of depth. Now, talked a lot about football there, so your turn to talk Football Ferns, but specifically the squad depth that they are building, even if Michael Main's just the interim coach and he's building the squad depth for someone else. Maybe Jenny Bindon.
Yeah, maybe she's the one who's auditioning. It's been a good week for the Bindon family because Jenny's now the assistant coach with well she's got Michael Main's old job now that Michael Main is doing Jika Klimkova's old job. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Sam Wilkinson as well added to the crew. Plus they've got an Englishman to be their goalkeeping coach. So it's a pretty handy staff, and it's a completely different staff than what they had before. Whereas when Main went to the Olympics, he more or less just kept the other coaches that Klimkova had around. One of which being himself, he was one of them. He stepped up. They did bring in Natalie Lawrence, former Phoenix coach, to be the extra assistant to take over his old role while he was doing the other one. But none of those coaches from the Olympics, from like the coaching stuff, I don't know what medical and support staff, whatever, I'm sure there's crossover there, but specifically the assistants and the goalkeeping coach, like those are all changed now. And yes, I find it hard to view that as something that you do for an interim coach who might only have one more tour in charge. That seems like something you do when you're planning longer term. And reiterate it, this is what Darren Baisley did as well. Like even to the parallel of Simon Elliott and Jenny Bindon, I think there's a lot in common there, where you get someone who was a legend for the team as well, can relate to the players on that level, but also has big coaching experience. Bindon's done a lot of stuff in sort of USA college level. She's been coaching more recently in England, a little bit with London City Lionesses, actually most recently with Reading, which is funny because Tyler Bindon signed with Reading because like he was in the LAFC academy and he was playing America, like USA under 18s or under 19s or something at that time. He moved to they moved to England because Jenny got a job coaching with as the goalkeeper coach for London City Lionesses, which didn't last because then they got a big they got bought out by a billionaire, and now that team is completely different. But except for Grace Neville was still hanging around there. But that's why he moved to London, why their family moved to London, and he trialed with Reading because it was just a local club that would have him. He ended up signing there, and now they've made him a bunch of money, and he's been excellent. So, and then after that coincidental thing, I would imagine in the same way that Chris Wood's presence helps Tyler Bindon get a gig at Nottingham Forest, I'm guessing Tyler Bindon's presence helps Jenny Bindon get a gig with Reading's women's team as well. So as their goalkeeping coach. But that's no longer because she's now the Football Ferns main assistant, which, yeah, it's again, like deep parallel with how Simon Elliott was brought in for the All Whites as well, which I think for the most part has gone really well. So I think that's definitely a pattern that you want to follow. I was talking about like the football. I remember writing pre-Olympics how the depth of the squad, the growing depth, the burgeoning depth, the expanding depth was a focus then. I think it's even more so now because Michael Main has told us that it is. And you said 40, that was a good number because that's also the number that he's been saying in interviews is he has around about 40 players that he's in contact with and that he's tracking closely. And obviously there are more. There are youth team players. There are a few younger ones who are maybe a little bit deeper in the mix, not really contending for Football Ferns squads just yet, but will be at some point. Or there's maybe some older players, some capped players who have dipped out of the mix, potentially a few of the higher performing National League players as well might be in there, and you can take that well beyond 50 if you wanted. I don't think there's ever been a time in New Zealand women's football when we've had 50 plus players who could conceivably do a job at international level. I think that's a complete rarity, even at a time where it feels like there has been quite a lot of turnover, where there's quite a lot of the senior players they've had a lot of retirements in the last year, and then also before that, and this end of after every World Cup cycle, I guess you get a bunch of retirements, and this is the start of a new World Cup cycle, and for that reason, these games against Costa Rica are probably the least consequential ones they will play in that World Cup cycle. So it is the ones that make the most sense if you're going to do some rotating, if you're going to have a look at some of your depth options. And it's not just about like getting them into training, it's about putting them on the pitch and playing games, because it's one thing to say we think I don't know, Liz Anton is good enough to be pushing, competing with Michaela Moore or Claudia Bunge or whatever to be a centre back in this team. But if Katie Bowen and Rebecca Stott are starting every game at centre back, you're not really getting an opportunity to see that in action, right? You've got the trainings, you've got your whatever they're doing at their clubs, but you want to give them international games and extended international games to prove it. that feels like what this tour is about, where you do have 5 uncapped players. You got Mania Elliott in there, you got Maya Hahn, you got Emma Peinenberg, you got Kelly Brown, who I thought was injured, but apparently not. I guess there's a couple of weeks before the thing as well, so she might well return for Perth before then, which would be good because she was going very well for Perth. It's a little bit surprised that she's been picked ahead of someone like Maggie Jenkins, but I think maybe that's more they want Kelly Brown in there because she's a number 9, not a winger, like not a utility forward. They want specifically someone who can be a striker and score some goals. And Kelly Brown does have 3 A-League goals already to her name this season and has scored copious amounts in the level below the A-League over the last couple of years. And who was the other uncapped player? There was someone else, Gio Candy as well, who played 1 game for the Wellington Phoenix a couple of years ago as a backup goalkeeper, has been the backup for Melbourne Victory recently, training the house down apparently, but hasn't actually got a game, which would be nice if they would actually let her play at some point. But the goalkeeping depth is a little bit of a weird one because Anna Leit's not available because she's been injured and she doesn't have a club. Well, if you're injured and don't have a club and you haven't played a game for 6 months, you really shouldn't be making national teams no matter how good you are. So fair enough, like give her some space and let that happen naturally. But yeah, beyond Vic Essen and then maybe a little bit of Brie Edwards, there's great goalkeeping depth, but it's not great goalkeeping like starting depth. It's prospect depth. It's Amy Daniele. It's maybe even Brooke Neary as well, getting on the bench when Daniele's been injured for the Phoenix. It's Murphy Sheaf, who's playing university stuff, who went to the Olympics as the 3rd choice. It's I thought Una Foyle would have had a good chance. Who's been playing professionally in Ireland, long-time goalkeeper for Canterbury United in the National League. So there's depth there, as well as Gio Candy. There's depth there, but it's not necessarily proven depth. So I think that's a little bit of they've had to stretch a little bit to fill out the goalkeeping things with that elite there. But I mean, most of the squad just looks like what most of the squad has looked like for a while. You're just missing a few of the key players, and it's a lot of the starting 11 players, and that does feel deliberate. I mean, Leit's injured, Steinmetz is injured. We've talked about the 3 defenders who aren't there. Ellie Riley's injured, and maybe don't know if she'll get back at any point. Like that might be a career-ending injury. We don't quite know yet. There goes your entire starting 4 and your number 1 goalkeeper. So it's definitely going to be playing opportunities for everyone else. That seems to make a lot of sense. The only thing about it is that Michael Main's been asked a few times and he doesn't seem to be able to give a straight answer to the question of like, are you just rotating these players or are they dropped? He seems to talk around it, and that's really weird. Like that seems like it seems strange, but also at the same time I'm thinking, well, if you did make a bold decision to drop them and you just don't want to admit it, that doesn't make sense either. Like it seems like if you made a bold decision like that, you'd want to own that decision. That seems like something you do with a sort of forceful personality. So that angle doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I am pondering the idea with my tinfoil hat on over whether maybe there's a little bit of Yika Kumkova player mutiny kind of fallout stuff going on there with 3 of their senior players maybe being told like, officially we're just resting you, and that is the purpose of the thing. We want to test the depth. We want to give them an opportunity to actually play some games, not just be in squad but play some games. Then also maybe if there might be a sort of unofficial being like, let us show you who's boss coming down from the national body, not from Michael Main, which would be why he's sort of talking around it and sounding a little bit uncomfortable answering that question. Might be something like that. Might be a little bit too conspiratorial, but New Zealand football did get made to look pretty stupid over that situation when also the investigation did actually say like there wasn't a legal wrongdoing or breach of contract or anything like that. Like it did clear Kumkova and they still came out looking bad. So maybe there might be a little bit of a slap of the wrist of something involved there. I'm not sure, but it also kind of doesn't matter as long as we're in a situation where the next squad is named and CJ Bott's there and Katie Bowen's there and Rebecca Stott's there, then sweet ass. Like we all move on. It's a new era. It's a new coaching regime, and they are 3 of our best players. That's all it needs to be. You know, if there needed to be a point made, okay, the point's been made and we move forward. If not, then it doesn't matter. They're just having a rest, and we're having a look at some of these other options and seeing who else can be centre backs in case one of them gets injured for a major tournament, which does happen. You do get a lot of injuries in football, so you got to have that. You got to have that backup. It's an interesting squad for a few of these reasons. We'll see what they look like against Costa Rica, but we are likely to see a team there that has Macy Fraser, Maya Hahn, Millie Clegg as key players and a sort of amongst your attack, along with maybe who else might I put in that category? I mean, like Jackie Hand, Indy Riley, have kind of already established themselves there, but I think in particular that Fraser, Hahn getting their combination going back again from the under-17 World Cup once upon a time, and then Millie Clegg as well. Like those are three creative players of a type that we just don't have otherwise. Like there's a little bit of a rarity there. There's a uniqueness in having three of them at once as well, and being able to have them combining with each other. So I think there's something special there that could be that could be uncovered, as if they're able to, if they can get the tactics right around them, if they get the team right around them, the defensive set, and get them the ball in good positions. I think those three could do something pretty handy and actually give the Ferns a bit of an attacking threat, which they haven't had for quite a while. So there's some pretty exciting potential about the squad, and that to see them together, we've only got maybe a few minutes of Macy Fraser and Millie Clegg on the pitch at the same time for the Football Ferns at the Olympics, and then Fraser got injured and went off. So very, very limited looks at this in the past, and we've never seen Maya Hahn play for the senior national team either. So that, like, the focus is on the selections right now. When the games are actually being played, that's where the focus should be, is looking at those three young attackers and seeing what they can offer and how they can take the team forward, addressing what is our overwhelming biggest weakness, which is the lack of goal threat.
In the A-League, I think we had a loss for the Wellington Phoenix Women, so they've had a couple losses in a row. Auckland FC, another big win at Mount Smart, the Temple of Mount Smart. Auckland FC, top of the table. And Wellington Phoenix Women, they've dipped out of the top six. So we're still hoping the Wellington Phoenix Women can crack finals footy for the first time, but they got to win some games. And they, points-wise, they're 2 points, 3 points out of the top six. They got the same number of wins as a lot of the teams above them, but less draws, more losses. And Auckland FC are sitting pretty comfy at the top of the table. They got the most wins, they got the most points, and as usual, they have the fewest goals conceded. Just quickly, because we talked a lot of football here, and it wasn't the biggest weekend of A-League football, where are you at with the Wellington Phoenix Women? How are you feeling about their finals chances?
Well, I still think their finals chances are pretty significant. They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games to go. So it's still a fair way. And I think 3 of their last 4 games are at home. And there's a couple other, 3 of their next 4 games are at home too. Those overlap, those streaks. But it's frustrating because that game where they lost 1-0 to Brisbane Roar was almost identical to the game where they lost 1-0 to Central Coast in the previous round. Like, both of them away games, both of them 1-0 scorelines, both of them, I think, second half goals. 62nd minute against Brisbane and 54th minute against Central Coast. And most overwhelmingly, both of them were really strong performances that deserved at least a point. I think they played really well in both of those games and came away with nothing because they couldn't score a goal, because they couldn't put the ball in the pesky back of it. They couldn't put the ball in the old onion bag, as Tommy Smith would have said. They just couldn't do it. Like, they mustered heaps of chances, good crosses, getting in good situations, overlaps, and pullbacks and all this kind of stuff, like long shots, and they played really well. They defended really well for the most part as well. A little bit frisky at times against Brisbane, but set pieces too. Like, they had so many opportunities and they just couldn't score a goal. And it's happened 2 weeks in a row. And because of that, they've lost 2 games where they very easily could have taken something from it. But we know they are a much better team at home, and they are much better conversion rate for, they score a lot more goals at home as well. So they do have a few home games coming up, and they're going to have to, because they failed to get anything out of this little road stand, they're going to have to capitalize in those homers. But they're capable of doing that, and they did it last time, that home stretch as well.
And of course, Auckland FC had another victory at home. But this time, your mate Moreno was starting, I believe, on the left side of the midfield. What did you make of this Auckland FC win? Was it another typical Auckland FC win? Was there something different that you saw? How did you process this victory? They were playing, I think it was MacArthur FC, because they got that Bratton. Is that his
Yeah,
name in the midfield?
yeah, Luke Braddon. Really
Who
thought there were going to be punches thrown at some point there. He was really. It's not just that he was getting niggly. It's like I think Auckland FC kind of started it as well, specifically getting very physical in the midfield, and there was a few
well,
got the feeling quite a few words were thrown out there, but we didn't quite get fists.
but I think the German, he's another. They were talking up his leadership, but if you're not a MacArthur FC fan, you're just like, this is a niggly bugger. Who cares about his leadership? He's a niggly bugger. But I do believe, because I think MacArthur FC had a win against Wellington Phoenix in Wellington a few weeks ago, like earlier in the season. And just as you mentioned that niggle, it makes a lot of sense that Auckland FC, they are far more capable of dealing with guys like Bratton and a team like MacArthur FC, who are a bit niggly. They will get in the grit and grind with you if you want to do that, play that style of football. Auckland FC, as the best team in the A-League, they not only welcome it, but they can balance that gritty football with winning, razzle dazzle with clinical defense. And I think that's a major, you've just opened up a notable difference between Auckland FC and Wellington Phoenix, I reckon, because Wellington Phoenix, talked about them a little bit younger, maybe a bit more fragile, especially without Rufa, less composed, less experienced, whereas Auckland FC, that, as I've said all season long, they're playing big boy footy. They can be robust with a niggly opposition without losing the clinical goal scoring razzle dazzle, but also shutting down opposition attacks with just well-timed tackles and not losing the plot, as we've seen. Not for Wellington Phoenix, it's losing the plot as in like minor mishaps or becoming big mishaps, not necessarily losing the plot and getting in a scrap. But I do think that Auckland FC showed their class and their composure in how they went to battle with MacArthur FC, but also just won the game playing good footy.
Yeah, I'd even take that slightly further and say that's an inbuilt part of their identity, even is being able to do that, being able to go, head to head, right up to the line. They don't seem to cross it. I don't think we've seen too much petty stuff or silly fouls. They don't seem to be a team that gets an abundance of yellow cards or anything like that. But they're certainly not afraid of a bit of the scrappy stuff in midfield in particular. And yeah, it's part of how they play, and it's something that's been quite successful for them. And it's also something that's very emblematic of older, more experienced teams of being able to handle that stuff, whereas the younger, less experienced teams or players rather, tend to maybe take those things a little bit more personally or react emotionally, which I think, yes, it's a key difference between the Phoenix at the moment, who have a lot of young players, and Auckland FC, who have a couple of young players, but also have much more experience across the park in all positions. MacArthur did lose to the Phoenix, I think, like 2 or 3 weeks ago in MacArthur. That was the game where Costa Barbarousa scored the winning penalty. It was like they were getting played off the park in the first half, only 1-0 down. Bit of a second half comeback and managed to scrape a much needed 2-1 win on the road. But you are right in that MacArthur did beat Wellington in Wellington earlier on in the season as well. So yeah, there've been some formidable contests between them and each of the New Zealand teams there. So good win from Auckland FC. Moreno did start. He scored a goal after 9 minutes. I kind of don't feel like he really did anything else in that game. So that's in a way, that's kind of just exactly the same as his sub appearances, right? It's like he'll give you 15 minutes of creative excellence and then maybe not as much afterwards. So maybe that is more consistent than it seems, is that he comes on, scores within 10 minutes of stepping on the pitch, and then maybe faded away a little bit after that. But that was an important goal. And even more important was the winning goal in the 80th minute. So not quite at the 80th minute means like 79 point something. So it wasn't quite within the last 10 minutes of the game, but close enough, right? It's another relatively late goal to decide an outcome in Auckland FC's favor, as they continue to do. And after I wrote a big piece about how all the New Zealand players, basically like almost literally all of the New Zealand players on this team, are at least matching expectations, but most of them exceeding expectations and what we thought they would have, like what the general consensus would have been for what they'd be capable of playing A-League football, particularly many of them playing A-League football for the first time. So many of these Kiwis exceeding expectations, wrote a big old thing about it, and then two imports scored the key goals in the subsequent game. But first goal set up by Max Mata, second goal set up by Francis de Vries. So you're still getting that impact there from those fellas doing, very important things. In fact, that almost is a better example of what I was saying, because it's not trying to argue that the Kiwi players are the overwhelming best players on the pitch, just saying that they are giving them so much more value than they maybe had a right to expect. And you're seeing that there in that game where like they're not the guys scoring the goals, but they're setting up the goals. And that's equally as important, but a lot more subtle, a lot more sort of undercover. But maybe not so much for Francis de Vries, because he's getting a lot of these assists. But that was a big moment as well for Max Mata, being able to, like, little nod back at the far post. Moreno's there to turn it home. De Vries has done this from day one, but Mata's really looked quite comfortable in these starts that he's been getting, and I expect that to continue on, not in the least because of, how well he's playing, sure, but also I think Guillermo Mai has just I think he's been a much more influential player when he's able to play as the second striker with a lot more freedom to roam around and do stuff like that. So there's another example of how a Kiwi player is helping the imports play better themselves as well. So the formula's working for Auckland FC.
I would like to take credit for the Max Mata, my combination.
Yeah, you can have it. It's either you or Steve Corica. So
obviously I'm far smarter about football than he is. In my infinite footballing wisdom, Tommy Smith win an eye. He's doing all right. Like, everyone was talking shit. He was too slow. What's he doing playing for Auckland FC? But he has stepped in for, what's the Aussie centre back?
Dan Hall.
And then I think Nando Zen Peineke, he got injured during that game. So then Tommy Smith went an eye. He went into centre back, and he stayed at centre back, but then Sakai came into centre back.
Smith did swap from right sided to left side, but that's probably more his natural spot anyway, is the left sided centre back. So
and then Callan Elliott went to right back, and Tommy Smith went an eye. He's doing a job at centre back. Like, that's just good depth. You got a veteran. He's reliable. He's doing the job. And again, he's doing the job for the best defense in the A-League. Like, it's not like he's just doing a job for a crappy defense. He is playing his part in a good defense. So I do want to shout out, obviously it's the theme of the podcast, so I have to shout out Tommy Smith win an eye, because he's Tommy Smith win an eye, not a Y. But he's doing a good job at centre-back, so shout out to him.
Yeah, I agreed entirely. I was one of the people who were very worried that he was going to, that the lack of pace would be something that gets exposed, but I just don't think it has been. I think he's very well positioned. He's a very organised player. He's been great in the air. He's winning a lot of those headers. He's very good on the ball, and he's good enough on the ball that it doesn't really matter that he's playing on the right side of defense. He's played plenty there in the past. He's an experienced player who can do either. But he's, he knows how to collect the ball, and he knows how to keep it moving. That's all you got to do in that spot as a centre back. And yeah, you're not seeing, I guess maybe the way that Auckland line up is they are a little bit of a deeper back line, so there's not as much space in behind necessarily. So the speed of the centre backs doesn't have to be exposed in that way. It doesn't necessarily matter that much as well. And you've got a sweeping defensive midfielder in Louis Verstraete, who is doing a lot of the engaging the other team, like jumping into tackles and stopping them and making sure they're not running straight at you anyway. So I don't think it's been an issue at all. And apart from that, Smith, the only other question with Smithy was whether at his age he'd just be able to play week after week and without getting injured or fatigued or whatever. And so far, so good on that count too. I think he's done beautifully. And since he came back in from Hall, they had a couple of weeks where they were starting Sakai there. Since Smith came back into that partnership, that was when they rediscovered the defensive form that they were showing at the start of the season. So yeah, I think he's been great and he deserves a shout out.
It's not like there's a lot of speed in the Auckland FC defense either. So it's like, at some point, you're just a good defense. It doesn't matter how fast you are. Because Franny de Vries, he's not lightning down the left flank. Sakai isn't necessarily the fastest defender either. Callan Elliott's a bit of a whippet, but Nando Pinocchio's not very fast. Dan Hall wasn't very fast. Verstrada's not very fast. At some point, you're just a good defense because guys are in the right position at the right time and they work together. So I kind of think like maybe a lesson to you. I'll happily teach you this lesson. Just chill out on the speed of a centre back. Like, it doesn't really matter if you're a good defensive team, let alone when you got the best goalie in the competition behind you as well. So I think you can. There's so many other ways to play defense without necessarily the speed. And as you're talking, I was like, okay, well, who's actually fast for Auckland FC? I don't think there's anyone. Maybe you could say Rogers Gillian's a bit of a whippet. He's kind of...
Well, yeah, the wingers are quick. Randall's fast. Gillian's fast. Rogerson's fast. I expect Moreno's fast. Guillermo Mai seems pretty... Like, the attackers are all pretty quick. Not Max Mata, but he's, you know...
But I don't think they're, like, above average for their positions. I think they're, you know...
Rogerson and Randall, I think, would be.
Right.
But maybe that's part of this too, is that they're the wingers, right? They get back and cover. That's something that's been talked about a lot, is they get back and they cover that distance. So the fullbacks don't have to cover the distance. So defensive midfielder doesn't have to cover the distance. And I'm trying to think of this might just be because I haven't looked for it specifically. And so I'm missing instances, but just based on vibes, based on memories, I can't picture Auckland FC getting counterattacked a whole lot. And that's the main situation where speed is a big focus. If you're going to be a team that likes to play in broken play, like the Phoenix do, you are going to try to counterattack yourself, but you're also, because of that, those are vulnerable situations, those transitional things where the ball's changing position. If you're counterattacking a lot yourself, you're probably going to get counterattacked a lot in return. The Phoenix have issues with that sometimes, but I think they do have a bit of... they have a similar thing where they have a defensive midfielder who knows how to get across and stop those attacks, and they have wingers who get back and defend, and that part of it is quite similar. But Auckland FC just don't seem like a team that gets counterattacked a lot. In that case, you just don't... Yeah, the speed doesn't get exposed very much, and then it's just not a factor. It's just not a part of the game. They force teams to build up more slowly against them, and then what you're actually facing is a lot of shots from distance and crosses, and that's exactly what they want to deal with. They don't concede a lot of shots at all, but they do, I think, give up a fair few crosses. But then Dan Hall, Nando Pinocchio especially, and then now Tommy Smith, like, they just win the headers. And Alex Paulson's good at that stuff, and has actually, I think, this season shown an improvement in how well he's attacked the aerial stuff as well. So, like, they just deal with it. You know, that's how they defend, and they're good at it.
It's also very hard to counterattack if the defense is ready for you. So yeah, I don't know how
there's nothing to counter. Yeah,
I don't know how you can counterattack against Auckland FC, because like De Vries and Sakai are very smart footballers. So if the ball's going up on the right, De Vries is chilling. If the ball's going up on the left, Sakai's chilling. Pinocchio, Dan Hall, Tommy Smith, very good defenders who are just always going to be in the right place. And you've got Verstrada in front of them, who's always protecting the defense. So if you've got like two of your defenders going upfield, Verstrada's just chilling. So then you've got three defenders at the back, but also Alex Paulson. So he's communicating, but he's also, like, I don't think Alex Paulson... Wait, let me put it this way. Alex Paulson, he's always standing outside his box. Like, he seems like a goalkeeper who would love to just go stand on halfway if he could. So right then, he's like, okay, ball goes over the top, Paulson's onto it already. But if they're not playing over the top in behind the Auckland FC defense, he's communicating. So that he's organizing the defense in front of him. And I just kind of feel like Auckland FC, this is something I'll watch for coming up this weekend, is because I think it was a Barcelona thing back in the day where they just like, it was a rule. You always had to have 3 defenders defending, ready to defend. No matter where the ball was, you got 3 guys back, ready, and the goalkeeper. I feel like that's something that Auckland FC do, just right now, thinking about it. But you've also got Paulson, the best goalie, so that's a recipe for no counter-attacking. So there you go, just solve the riddle.
Yeah, I think they're very, because I remember stats from earlier on in the season about how they were the team that wins the most ball in the opposition half. I think there's just, in general, they're very combative. They get into those tackles in the midfield for Strider especially. And that's how you stop a counterattack, because you can't just, there's no clean path to run because you're always engaged with someone. Like there's someone sticking a foot in, right? And if you give away the foul, again, this is a Barcelona thing. This is a Manchester City Guardiola thing as well. Like if you lose the ball, just foul quickly. And then you can get everyone back and you're set. You know, you just never see that Auckland FC defense out of shape.
I've never felt it watching a football team, especially a football team like I'm emotionally invested in, equally invested Auckland FC and Wellington Phoenix, just FYI, but I am emotionally invested in those 2 teams. I am confident that Auckland FC can win the ball at the other end of the field. I expect it. Like, they're all just pouncing. Like, Mize, Atera, Mata works hard, Rogerson works hard, Gillian works hard, Gallios, he's working hard. But, if you want to play out against Auckland FC, I'm confident that they will win the ball at some point. And if they don't win it on that move, they're going to win it on the next move. And as you said, that's the best way to start your defensive setup, is with your strikers and with your attacking midfielders winning the ball off the opposition defense, because then bang, you got a shot right away. So good stuff.